The frozen wind howled through the platform at the Chico, California train station on that bitter January evening in 1884, and Grace Whitmore clutched her 6-month-old daughter tighter to her chest as she realized the man who was supposed to meet her had never come. She had traveled all the way from Boston with little Lily bundled in every blanket she owned, responding to a carefully worded advertisement from a rancher named Harold Gunderson, who sought a wife to help manage his homestead. His letters had been kind, promising a warm home and security for both her and her baby. Grace had been honest about her situation, a widow at 22 with an infant daughter after her husband died in a factory accident. Harold had written back that he understood hardship and would welcome them both. But now, as the last of the other passengers dispersed into the twilight and the station master prepared to close up for the night, Grace stood alone on the platform with growing dread settling into her bones. "Miss, I need to lock up," the station master said, his voice not unkind but firm. "You cannot stay here overnight." "Please, I am waiting for someone," Grace said, her teeth beginning to chatter. The temperature had dropped dramatically as the sun set, and she could see her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Harold Gunderson, he should have been here hours ago." The station master frowned, pulling his coat tighter. "Gunderson? I heard tell he left town about 3 weeks back, headed to Oregon, some mining opportunity he could not pass up." Grace felt her knees weaken. "That cannot be. He sent for me. I have his letters." "I am sorry, miss, but I know what I heard." "Now, there is a boarding house about 2 miles into town, but I would not recommend walking it in this cold, especially not with a baby. Do you have money for a room?" Grace opened her small purse with trembling fingers. She had exactly $7.30 left after spending nearly all her savings on the train tickets. "I have some. That wind is picking up something fierce. This is the worst cold snap we have had in years." The station master looked genuinely concerned now, glancing at baby Lily who had begun to whimper. "Look, my wife and we would offer you our spare room, but we left this morning to stay with her sister in Sacramento. I was just here to close up the depot. I cannot in good conscience leave the building unlocked." Grace felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had survived too much already to break down now. "I understand. Which direction is the boarding house?" "East down Main Street, but miss, truly, this cold is dangerous." Already below freezing and dropping fast, he hesitated. "There is a ranch about a half-mile west of here. The Brennan place. Samuel Brennan runs cattle and breaks horses. He is a decent man, keeps to himself mostly, but he would not turn away someone in need, not in weather like this." Grace looked west, seeing nothing but darkness and the howling wind carrying swirls of snow that had begun to fall. Then she looked east toward town, equally forbidding. Lily cried louder now, her little face red from the cold despite being wrapped in 3 blankets. Grace made her decision. "The ranch. How do I find it?" "Follow the main road west. You will see a large oak tree standing alone about halfway there. Past that, look for a light. He usually keeps a lantern burning in his front window." The station master pulled out a heavy wool scarf. "Here, take this. Wrap it around the baby." "I cannot. My daughter outgrew it years ago. Please." He pressed it into her hands. "Go quickly now. This storm is only getting worse." Grace wrapped the scarf carefully around Lily, tucking it securely. She picked up her single carpet bag, far lighter than she wished since she had sold most of her possessions to afford the journey, and stepped off the platform into the bitter cold. The wind immediately stole her breath, and she gasped, turning her body to shield Lily. Each step felt like pushing through an invisible wall as she made her way down the road heading west. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that stung her face and obscured her vision. Grace kept her head down, watching her feet to make sure she stayed on the road. Her thin traveling dress and coat, appropriate for a Boston winter, were woefully inadequate for this California cold snap. Her fingers had gone numb within minutes despite her gloves, and her face felt frozen. Lily screamed now, terrified and cold, and Grace whispered soothing words that were torn away by the wind. She nearly missed the oak tree, a dark shadow looming suddenly to her right. Grace stopped, searching desperately for any sign of a light ahead. Nothing. Just darkness and snow and cold. Panic seized her chest. What if the station master had been wrong about the distance? What if there was no light tonight? What if Samuel Brennan had gone to town or was away on business? Please, God, she whispered into the storm. Please let there be help ahead. She forced herself forward, one foot in front of the other. Lily's cries had weakened to pitiful mewls, and Grace knew that was worse than the screaming. Babies got quiet when they were too cold. She had to find shelter. Now. Then, like a miracle, a small golden glow appeared in the distance. Grace sobbed with relief and hurried forward, though her legs felt like lead. The light grew brighter, and she could make out the shape of a house, a barn, fences. She staggered up to the front porch and raised her numb hand to knock on the door, but her frozen fingers could barely curl into a fist. She managed 3 weak thumps before her strength gave out. Please, she called out, her voice hoarse. Please help us. She did not know if anyone heard. She knocked again, harder this time, desperation giving her strength. Lily had gone completely quiet now, and that terrified Grace more than anything. She pounded on the door with both fists. Please, my baby, please. The door swung open suddenly, and Grace nearly fell forward. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. Good Lord, a deep male voice said. Get inside, quickly. Grace stumbled over the threshold into blessed warmth. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and the contrast from the brutal cold outside was so extreme it made her skin burn. She swayed on her feet. Sit down before you fall down, the man said, guiding her firmly to a chair near the fire. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and sharp blue eyes that took in the situation instantly. He reached for Lily. Let me see the baby. No, Grace tried to protest, but her arms would not obey her properly. I am not going to hurt her. She needs to be checked for frostbite. His voice was authoritative but not harsh. He carefully took Lily from Grace's arms and carried her closer to the fire, unwrapping the layers of blankets and the scarf. What were you thinking, being out in this weather with an infant? I did not have a choice, Grace managed through chattering teeth. The train just arrived. No one came to meet me. Samuel Brennan, for this had to be him, examined Lily with surprising gentleness. He touched her tiny hands and feet, her nose and ears, checking carefully. She is cold, but I do not see signs of frostbite. That is good. Lucky. He looked at Grace. What about you? Can you feel your fingers and toes? Barely. That is actually good too, means they are not frozen through. He wrapped Lily back up in the blankets and placed her in Grace's arms. Hold her close. Your body heat will help warm her. I am going to get more blankets and make some warm broth. Do not put your hands or feet directly against the fire. Warm them slowly. He moved with efficient purpose, disappearing into another room and returning with a pile of quilts. He draped them over Grace and Lily, tucking them in carefully. Then he went to the stove and began ladling something from a pot into a mug. Grace watched him through exhausted eyes. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and broad shoulders under a simple work shirt. His hands were large and calloused but moved with surprising dexterity as he worked. The house was small but clean, furnished simply with sturdy handmade furniture. It felt like a home, even if it was clearly a bachelor's residence. "Here," Samuel said, bringing her the mug. "Beef broth. Sip it slowly. It will help warm you from the inside." Grace took the mug with trembling hands and Samuel steadied it for her, helping guide it to her lips. The broth was hot and savory, and the first sip sent warmth spreading through her chest. She took another sip, then another. "Slowly," Samuel cautioned. "You will make yourself sick if you drink too fast." Grace nodded, forcing herself to take small sips. Beneath the blankets, she felt Lily beginning to stir more actively, a good sign. The baby made small, fussy sounds, and Grace shifted to check on her. Lily's face had regained some color and her eyes were open. "She looks better," Samuel observed. That was dangerously close. Another half hour in that cold. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "The station master said you might help. I did not know where else to go." "Old Tom sent you." Samuel pulled over another chair and sat down, his expression serious. "Tell me what happened. Why were you out there alone with a baby in a snowstorm?" Grace explained haltingly about Harold Gunderson, the letters, the advertisement, the journey from Boston. As she spoke, Samuel's expression grew darker. "Gunderson," he said with disgust when she finished. "I know of him. He has a reputation for schemes and shortcuts. Left 3 different business partners holding bad debts before he ran off to Oregon. I am sorry you got caught up in his dishonesty." "What am I going to do?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Grace felt the weight of her situation crushing down on her. She was stranded in an unfamiliar town with no prospects, almost no money, and a baby depending on her. "Right now, you are going to rest and get warm," Samuel said firmly. "The storm is getting worse. You can hear the wind picking up. You and the baby will stay here tonight. Tomorrow, when the weather clears, we will figure out the next steps. I cannot impose. It is not an imposition. It is basic human decency." Samuel stood up. "I will make up the bed in the spare room. It is small, but it is warm and clean. You need proper rest." Grace wanted to argue to maintain some dignity, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She simply nodded. Lily had begun to make hungry sounds, and Grace knew she needed to feed her soon. "Is there somewhere I could?" She gestured vaguely, feeling her face heat with embarrassment. Samuel understood immediately. "The spare room. I will get it ready now, and you will have complete privacy. There is a bolt on the door if that makes you more comfortable." "Thank you," Grace said again, the words feeling inadequate for the kindness he was showing them. Samuel disappeared down a short hallway, and Grace heard him moving around, the sound of drawers opening and closing. He returned after a few minutes. "It is ready. Let me help you up." Grace's legs were unsteady, but with Samuel's support, she made it to the spare room. It was indeed small, just big enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a small table with a lamp. But it was clean and warm, and the bed looked more inviting than anything Grace had seen in weeks. "I will be right outside if you need anything," Samuel said. "There is a pitcher of water on the dresser and an extra chamber pot underneath. Take all the time you need." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Grace heard his footsteps retreating, giving her the privacy he had promised. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to feed Lily, who latched on eagerly. As the baby nursed, Grace let herself truly feel the terror of how close they had come to freezing to death on that road. Tears streamed down her face silently as she held her daughter close. They were alive. They were safe. For tonight, at least, that was enough. When Lily had finished eating and fallen into a deep sleep, Grace changed her damp diaper and wrapped her snugly. She laid the baby carefully in the center of the bed, surrounding her with pillows to keep her from rolling, though at 6 months, Lily was not quite mobile enough for that yet. Grace then allowed herself to remove her wet boots and stockings, her frozen coat and dress. She found a nightgown laid out on the dresser, clearly placed there by Samuel. It was far too large, obviously his, but it was clean and dry. She changed quickly, then slipped under the covers next to Lily. The bed was soft, the blankets warm, and the room filled with the quiet sound of her daughter's breathing. Grace closed her eyes and, despite all her worries about the future, fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. She woke to pale morning light filtering through a small window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, Grace could not remember where she was. Then everything came flooding back. She sat up quickly, checking on Lily. The baby was still sleeping peacefully, her cheeks rosy and warm. Grace climbed out of bed carefully and went to the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was covered in white, pristine and beautiful in the early morning sun. The sky was clear and blue, giving no hint of the previous night's fury. There was a soft knock on the door. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you awake?" Grace realized she was still wearing Samuel's nightgown. "Yes, but I am not dressed. I will leave some things outside the door for you. Hot water for washing, and I found some clothes that might work temporarily. They belonged to my mother. She passed 3 years ago, but I kept some of her things." Grace heard him set something down, then his footsteps retreating again. She waited a moment, then opened the door. There was a basin of steaming water, a towel, a bar of soap, and a neatly folded dress with undergarments. Grace brought everything inside and closed the door. The dress was a simple calico print in dark blue, practical and well made. It was a bit large on Grace, but not terribly so. She washed quickly in the warm water, a luxury after the cold journey, and dressed in the borrowed clothes. She brushed and repinned her long dark hair, trying to make herself look presentable. Lily woke as Grace was finishing, and she changed and fed the baby before emerging from the room. Samuel was at the stove flipping bacon in a cast iron skillet. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Morning, I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Grace admitted. "Thank you for the clothes. They fit well enough. My mother was about your size." She would be glad to know they were being put to good use. He gestured to the table. "Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." Grace settled into a chair, holding Lily on her lap. The baby was alert now, looking around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes. Samuel brought over plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, then poured coffee for both of them. "This is too much," Grace protested. "You have already done so much. You need your strength." Samuel sat down across from her. "Besides, I was making breakfast anyway. It is no trouble to make extra." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but delicious, and Grace realized just how hungry she had been. She had barely eaten on the train, too worried about running out of money. "I have been thinking about your situation," Samuel said finally. "Chico is not a large town, but there are options. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house. She is always looking for help, and she might be willing to give you room and board in exchange for work. Or the general store might need someone. The owner, Mr. Phillips, is a fair man." Grace nodded, trying to feel hopeful. "I will inquire at both places. Do you think it will be possible to get into town today?" Samuel looked out the window. "The road will be muddy from the snow melting, but passable by this afternoon, I would think." "I need to go into town anyway to pick up some supplies. I can take you in the wagon." "I do not want to be more of a burden." "You are not a burden," Samuel interrupted gently. "You are someone who needs help, and I am in a position to provide it. That is all." Grace studied him over her coffee. He met her gaze steadily, his blue eyes direct and honest. There was something solid about him, dependable. She found herself wanting to trust him. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I am sorry, that is not my business." It is a fair question, given that you spent the night under my roof. Samuel refilled his coffee. I inherited this ranch from my father 5 years ago. He died of pneumonia and my mother passed a couple of years later. My older brother wanted to head east to try city life, so he signed his share over to me. I have been running the place myself since then. It is a modest operation, about 50 head of cattle and a dozen horses I am breaking to sell. I do well enough. It must be lonely. Sometimes, Samuel admitted, but I like the work and I like the land. I always figured I would marry eventually, have a family, just has not happened yet. I am particular about who I spend my time with, and most of the women in town are either already married or— He trailed off diplomatically. Or not interested in a rancher who lives half an hour outside of town, Grace supplied with a small smile. Something like that. Samuel smiled back, and Grace noticed how it transformed his face, making him look younger and less serious. What about you? Your husband, how long has he been gone? Almost a year now. Thomas worked at a textile factory in Boston. There was an accident with one of the machines. He died instantly, they told me. Grace looked down at Lily. I was 7 months pregnant. Thomas never got to meet his daughter. I am sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult. His family blamed me somehow, said I had distracted him from his work. They wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. My own parents died when I was young and I have no siblings. I was alone. Grace felt the old pain but pushed through it. I tried to make it work in Boston. I took in sewing, laundry, anything I could do while caring for Lily. But the rent was too high, the work too scarce. When I saw Harold Gunderson's advertisement, it seemed like providence. A chance for a new start, a home for my daughter. I should have known it was too good to be true. You were brave to try, Samuel said. Traveling all this way alone with a baby, hoping for something better. That takes courage. Grace felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had called her brave before. Foolish, desperate, unlucky, yes, but not brave. Thank you, she whispered. Lily chose that moment to reach for the table, grabbing for a spoon. Grace caught her hand gently. No, sweetheart, that is not for you. How old is she? Samuel asked. 6 months. She will be 7 months on the 15th. She is a pretty baby. Looks like her mother. Grace felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. She has her father's eyes, though. Thomas had gray eyes just like that. They finished breakfast, and Samuel cleared the dishes while Grace tended to Lily. The morning passed quietly. Samuel had chores to do, and he excused himself to go see to the animals. Grace offered to help, but he insisted she should rest and recover from the previous night's ordeal. Left alone in the house, Grace explored a bit. It was a simple home, but she could see signs of care. The floors were swept clean, dishes washed and put away, furniture dusted. A few books sat on a shelf near the fireplace, and Grace examined the titles. A Bible, several dime novels, a collection of poems by Walt Whitman, and a book on horse training. A man who read poetry. That was unexpected. She found herself drawn to the window, watching as Samuel worked in the barn. She could see him moving around, hauling buckets of water, forking hay. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable with physical labor. Once, he emerged leading a large chestnut horse, and she watched him spend time stroking its neck, talking to it. The horse nuzzled his shoulder affectionately. Grace felt a strange flutter in her chest and pushed it away firmly. She was in no position to develop feelings for anyone, especially not the man who had rescued her out of simple kindness. He was helping her because it was the right thing to do, nothing more. She needed to focus on finding work and a place to live, on building a stable life for Lily. Samuel came back inside around noon, stomping snow off his boots. I am going to hitch up the wagon. We can head into town whenever you are ready. I will get our things together. It did not take long. Grace had so little. She carefully packed their few belongings back into the carpet bag, dressed Lily warmly, and met Samuel outside. The wagon was a sturdy farm wagon, and Samuel had placed several blankets on the seat. "For the cold," he explained, helping Grace up onto the seat. She settled Lily on her lap and arranged the blankets over them both. Samuel climbed up beside her and clicked to the horses. They started forward at a steady pace, the wagon wheels crunching through snow and mud. The journey was much different in daylight. Grace could see the landscape now, rolling hills dotted with oak trees, mountains visible in the distance. It was beautiful country, wild and open. "That is Mount Lassen," Samuel said, noticing her gaze. "On a clear day like this, you can see it perfectly. Still has snow on the peak year-round." "It is lovely, so different from Boston." "You miss the city," Grace considered the question. "I miss what it represented, I suppose, familiarity, memories of happier times, but the city itself, no, it held nothing but struggle for me by the end." They reached town in about 20 minutes. Chico was larger than Grace had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses, several cross streets with houses, and a church with a tall steeple. People were out and about despite the snow, going about their business. Samuel pulled the wagon up in front of a general store. "Let us start here. John Phillips is a good man to know in town. He hears about most opportunities." They entered the store, a bell jingling above the door. The interior was warm and crowded with merchandise, everything from dry goods to tools to bolts of fabric. A man with gray hair and spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Samuel Brennan, good to see you," he said warmly. Then his eyes moved to Grace and Lily. "And who might this be?" "This is Mrs. Grace Whitmore and her daughter Lily. They just arrived from Boston. I was hoping you might know of any work opportunities in town." Mr. Phillips came around the counter, his expression sympathetic as Samuel briefly explained the situation with Harold Gunderson. "That scoundrel," he muttered. "I am sorry you were deceived, Mrs. Whitmore. Let me think. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house is always busy. She might could use help. And I know Dr. Thornton's wife has been poorly lately. He might need someone to help at the house and with the children." "Dr. Thornton has an office above the barber shop," Samuel added. "We could walk over there now." "Thank you, Mr. Phillips," Grace said. "I appreciate any help." "You are welcome, my dear. Chico is a good town. We take care of our own." They left the general store and walked down the street to a building with a striped barber pole. A sign indicated stairs at the side led to Dr. Thornton's office. Samuel led the way up and they emerged into a small waiting area. A harried-looking man in his early 40s opened the inner door at the sound of their footsteps. "Samuel, hello, is something wrong?" Dr. Thornton looked concerned. "Nothing like that, Doc. This is Mrs. Grace Whitmore. She is looking for work and we heard you might need help at home." Dr. Thornton's expression transformed from concern to interest. Come in, come in." "Yes, I have been desperate for help, actually." They entered his office and Dr. Thornton gestured for them to sit. "My wife, Catherine, has been ill for several months. Consumption, I am afraid. She needs rest and quiet, but we have 3 children aged 8, 5, and 3. They are good kids, but they are a handful and Catherine cannot manage them in her condition. I have been trying to handle my practice and the household, but I am drowning. I need someone who can help with the children, the cooking, the cleaning. Do you have experience with that sort of work, Mrs. Whitmore?" "I do," Grace said. "I managed my own household in Boston, and I have been caring for my daughter since she was born. I am a hard worker, Dr. Thornton. Would you live in? We have a small room off the kitchen that is currently being used for storage, but it could be cleaned out. You and your daughter could stay there." Grace's heart leaped. A job with room and board, exactly what she needed. Yes, that would be perfect, and wages. I can pay $15 a month plus all meals and lodging. $15 was more than Grace had hoped for. That is very generous. When can you start? Immediately, if you need me to. Dr. Thornton looked relieved. Could you come by the house this evening? It is just 2 streets over, the white house with green shutters on Pine Street. I will introduce you to Catherine and the children, show you where everything is. You could start tomorrow morning if that suits. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. They shook hands and Grace felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had a job. She and Lily would have a place to stay, food to eat, security. It had all worked out so much faster than she had dared to hope. Outside, Samuel smiled at her. See, I told you it would work out. I cannot believe my luck. Or rather, I cannot believe your kindness. If you had not taken us in last night, if you had not brought me to town today. Grace felt tears of gratitude threatening. I am glad I could help. Samuel's voice was warm. Now, I need to get my supplies from Phillips, and then I will take you back to the ranch until this evening. We can bring you and Lily to Dr. Thornton's house after supper. Grace nodded, but she felt a strange reluctance. The ranch had felt safe, and Samuel had been nothing but kind. Leaving felt wrong somehow, even though she knew it was necessary. She was being foolish. She had known this man less than 24 hours. But he had saved her life and Lily's life, and that created a bond, whether she wanted it to or not. They collected Samuel's supplies, various items for the ranch, and loaded them into the wagon. The drive back to the ranch passed in comfortable conversation. Samuel asked about Boston, and Grace found herself telling him stories about the city, the ocean, the history. Samuel talked about the ranch, his plans to expand the horse breeding operation, his love for the land. Back at the ranch, Grace insisted on making supper to thank Samuel for his hospitality. She found ingredients in his pantry and set about making a simple stew with biscuits. Samuel protested at first but then gave in, admitting he was not much of a cook beyond basic meals. As Grace worked, Samuel played with Lily, sitting on the floor and making faces at her. The baby was fascinated, giggling at his antics. Grace watched them from the corner of her eye, stirring the stew. Samuel was a natural with children, patient and playful. He would make a good father someday. They ate supper as the sun set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and pink. It was peaceful, domestic, and Grace felt an ache in her chest. This was what she had hoped to find with Harold Gunderson. A home, companionship, a partner to build a life with. Instead, she had found it briefly in this borrowed moment with a stranger who had shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. After supper, Samuel hitched up the wagon again, and they made the journey back to town through the gathering darkness. He found Dr. Thornton's house easily, a neat white home with the promised green shutters. Warm light glowed in the windows. Samuel helped Grace down from the wagon and carried her carpet bag to the front door. Dr. Thornton answered before they could knock, right on time. Please come in. The house was comfortable and clearly lived in, with children's toys scattered around and the pleasant chaos of a busy family. A woman lay on a sofa near the fireplace, wrapped in blankets. She was thin and pale but had kind eyes. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice soft. "I am Catherine. I am so glad you are here." 3 children peeked around the doorway, curious about the newcomer. Dr. Thornton introduced them. Mary, the 8-year-old, looked serious and responsible. James, at 5, was clearly full of energy. Little Emma, just 3, hid behind her older sister's skirts. "They are beautiful children," Grace said warmly. "I look forward to getting to know all of you." Dr. Thornton showed Grace the small room off the kitchen. It was indeed filled with storage items, but Grace could see the potential. There was a narrow bed frame, a dresser, and a window overlooking the back garden. "I will clear this out tonight," Dr. Thornton promised. "You will have it ready for sleeping." "I can help," Samuel offered. Together, the two men moved the storage items to the attic while Grace sat with Catherine and the children. Catherine explained the household routine, the children's schedules, their likes and dislikes. Grace listened carefully, mentally organizing everything. "I cannot tell you what a relief this is," Catherine said quietly. "I hate being unable to care for my own family." "You must focus on getting well," Grace told her. "That is the most important thing." An hour later, the room was cleared and cleaned. Samuel and Dr. Thornton brought down the mattress from the attic, and Catherine provided fresh linens. Grace made up the bed while holding Lily on one hip, a skill she had perfected over the past months. Finally, it was time for Samuel to leave. Grace walked him to the door, suddenly not wanting him to go. "I do not know how to thank you properly," she said. "You saved our lives." "You do not owe me anything," Samuel replied, "but I would like to check on you and Lily, make sure you are settling in well. Would that be all right?" "I would like that very much." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Then Samuel tipped his hat. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Samuel." She watched from the window as he climbed into the wagon and drove away, disappearing into the darkness. Then she turned back to her new home, her new life, and set about putting Lily to bed in their small room. The first few days at the Thornton house passed in a whirlwind of activity. Grace threw herself into the work, determined to prove her worth. She woke early to prepare breakfast, got the children dressed and ready for the day, cleaned the house, did laundry, prepared meals, and managed 100 small tasks that kept a household running. The children warmed to her quickly. Mary, who had been trying to help her father with everything, visibly relaxed once Grace took over the household management. James followed Grace around like a puppy, chattering constantly and helping with small tasks. Little Emma was shy at first, but by the third day she climbed into Grace's lap during story time and fell asleep there. Catherine was easy to care for. She rested most of the day, and Grace brought her meals and tea, helped her wash and change clothes, and kept her company for short periods. The older woman was grateful and uncomplaining, focusing her limited energy on brief visits with her children. Dr. Thornton was clearly relieved to have Grace there. He could focus on his medical practice without worrying constantly about the home front. He was generous with praise and patient when Grace had questions about how he liked things done. And through it all, Grace thought about Samuel. She wondered what he was doing out on the ranch, whether he was taking care of himself, whether he was lonely. She told herself she was being silly, that she barely knew the man. But she could not stop herself from thinking about his kind eyes, his gentle hands, the way he had played so naturally with Lily. On the fourth day, Samuel came to town. Grace was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard his voice at the front door. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and hurried inside. Samuel stood in the front hallway, hat in hand, talking to Dr. Thornton. He looked up when Grace entered, and his face broke into a warm smile. "Grace, how are you settling in?" "Very well," she said, acutely aware of how plain she must look in her work dress and apron, her hair escaping from its pins. "Everyone has been wonderful." "I brought something for Lily," Samuel said, producing a small carved wooden rattle from his pocket. "I made it myself. I hope she likes it." Grace took the rattle, touched by the gesture. It was beautifully made, smooth, and perfectly sized for a baby's hand. "This is lovely. Thank you so much. Lily is napping right now, but she will love it when she wakes." "I was wondering if you might have some free time this Sunday afternoon," Samuel said. "The weather has been clear, and I thought you might like to get out of the house for a bit. I could take you and Lily for a drive, show you more of the area." Grace looked at Dr. Thornton, who nodded encouragingly. "You have been working very hard, Mrs. Whitmore. You should take some time for yourself. Sunday afternoons are usually quiet around here." "Then yes," Grace said, feeling a flutter of anticipation. "I would like that very much. I will pick you up at 2 o'clock. Samuel's smile widened. He exchanged a few more pleasantries with Dr. Thornton, then took his leave. Grace returned to her laundry, but her heart felt lighter. Sunday suddenly seemed very far away. The days passed with agonizing slowness until Sunday arrived. Grace dressed carefully in another of Samuel's mother's dresses, this one a soft gray with white trim. She pinned her hair neatly and even borrowed a bit of Catherine's rose salve for her lips. Lily wore a clean white dress and booties, looking adorable. Samuel arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hair neatly combed. The wagon had been cleaned and there were fresh blankets on the seat. "You look lovely," he said as he helped Grace up. "Thank you." Grace felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. They drove out of town, heading south along a well-maintained road. The day was crisp but sunny. The worst of the snow melted except in shaded areas. Samuel pointed out landmarks, explaining the history of the area. "Chico is still fairly young as towns go," he said. "Founded about 30 years ago. General John Bidwell established the first settlement. He is still around, actually, quite a prominent figure." "Have you lived here your whole life?" "Born and raised. My parents came out from Missouri in the early 50s, part of the westward migration. My father built the ranch from nothing, cleared the land, built the house and barn. It was hard work, but they loved it. You must miss them." "Every day," Samuel admitted, "but I like to think they would be proud of how I have kept the ranch going, built on what they started." They talked easily, the conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. Samuel was well-read and thoughtful, surprising Grace with his knowledge of poetry and literature. He talked about wanting to travel someday, to see the ocean, visit San Francisco, maybe even go back east to Boston. "What would you do if you could do anything?" Samuel asked. "If money and circumstances were not a concern," Grace thought about it. "I would have a home of my own," she said slowly. "A place where Lily could grow up safe and happy with a garden and maybe some chickens. I would sew beautiful things, not just practical mending. I would read books and maybe learn to play the piano. Simple things, really, but my own." "Those are not simple at all," Samuel said quietly. "Those are the things that make life worth living." They stopped beside a creek, and Samuel helped Grace down. They walked along the bank, Lily content in Grace's arms, watching the water sparkle in the sunlight. Samuel pointed out fish in the shallows and a blue heron standing statue still on the far bank. "This is one of my favorite spots," Samuel said. "I come here when I need to think. It is peaceful. It is beautiful." Grace breathed in the clean air, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. "Thank you for bringing us here." "I like spending time with you," Samuel said. He glanced at her, then away as if suddenly shy. "I hope that does not sound too forward." "It does not." Grace's heart beat faster. "I like spending time with you too." They stood there by the creek, not touching but close enough that Grace could feel the warmth radiating from Samuel's body. Lily cooed happily, reaching for the sunlight sparkling on the water. "I should probably get you back," Samuel said finally, though he sounded reluctant. "I do not want Dr. Thornton to think I kidnapped you." "I suppose you are right." The drive back to town felt too short. Samuel helped Grace down in front of the Thornton house, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Could I see you again next Sunday?" he asked. I would like that. Good. Samuel's smile was brilliant. I will count the days. Grace carried that smile with her as she went back into the house. She felt different somehow, lighter, more hopeful. She had not felt this way since Thomas died, had not thought she ever would again. But Samuel made her feel alive, made her want to think about the future. The following weeks established a pattern. Samuel came to town every Sunday, and they spent the afternoons together. Sometimes they went for drives, exploring the countryside. Other times they simply sat in the Thorntons' front parlor, talking while Lily played on a blanket at their feet. Samuel was endlessly patient with the baby, playing peek-a-boo and making her laugh with silly faces. The Thorntons approved of the courtship, for that was clearly what it was becoming. Dr. Thornton told Grace privately that Samuel was one of the finest men he knew, hardworking and honest. Catherine, despite her illness, took pleasure in watching the romance develop, often shooing Grace off to spend time with Samuel instead of fussing over her. Grace felt herself falling in love, though she tried to guard her heart. It seemed too soon after Thomas's death, too fast after knowing Samuel such a short time. But her feelings would not be denied. Samuel was everything she could want in a man: kind, dependable, gentle yet strong, with a quick mind and a generous spirit. He treated Lily like she was his own daughter, and he treated Grace with respect and affection. One Sunday in early March, Samuel took Grace and Lily back to the ranch for the first time since that desperate night in January. In daylight, with spring beginning to green the hills, the place looked completely different. The house was charming, the barn sturdy, the corrals well maintained. Samuel showed her around with obvious pride, introducing her to his horses and cattle. "This is Lady," he said, stroking the nose of a beautiful bay mare. "She is the smartest horse I have ever trained, and this big fellow is Duke. He is gentle as a kitten despite his size." Grace watched him with the animals, seeing the care and expertise in every movement. This was a man who knew what he was doing, who had built something solid and real. After the tour, Samuel made coffee and they sat on the front porch, watching the sun lower toward the horizon. Lily napped in Grace's arms, worn out from the fresh air and excitement. "Grace," Samuel said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Grace's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I have been thinking a lot these past weeks, about you, about Lily, about what I want from life." He turned to face her fully. "I know it has not been very long since we met. I know you are still grieving your husband. But I have fallen in love with you, with both of you. I think about you all the time, when I am working, when I am trying to sleep, every moment. I want to be part of your life if you will have me." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "Samuel, I am not asking you to decide anything right now," he continued quickly. "I know you need time. I just needed you to know how I feel, what my intentions are. I want to court you properly, with the hope that someday, when you are ready, you might consider marrying me." "I am ready now," Grace whispered. Samuel stared at her. "What? I love you too," Grace said, the words tumbling out. "I did not think I could feel this way again. I thought I had used up my chance at love, but you have shown me that I was wrong. You are the kindest, most wonderful man I have ever known. I would be honored to be your wife, Grace." Samuel's voice was choked with emotion. He reached out and gently cupped her face with one hand. "Are you sure? I do not want to rush you, I am sure." Grace leaned into his touch. "Life is uncertain. I learned that when I lost Thomas. We cannot waste time when we have found something real." Samuel leaned forward slowly, giving Grace time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I will take good care of you," Samuel vowed. "Both of you, I promise." "I know you will." They sat together on the porch as the sun set, making plans and dreaming of their future. Samuel wanted to marry soon, within the month if Grace was agreeable. They would live at the ranch, of course. Grace would need to give notice to Dr. Thornton, but Samuel was sure they would understand. "We can add on to the house," Samuel said enthusiastically. "Make the spare room bigger for Lily, build a proper parlor, whatever you want." "I just want to be with you," Grace said simply. They sealed their engagement with another kiss as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Dr. Thornton and Catherine were delighted when Grace shared the news the next day. Catherine cried happy tears, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever heard. Dr. Thornton shook Samuel's hand warmly when he came by that evening. "I am very happy for you both," the doctor said. "But I must admit, I am going to miss having Mrs. Whitmore here. She has been an absolute godsend." "I will help you find someone else," Grace promised. "I would not leave you in the lurch after all your kindness." "We will manage," Catherine said firmly from her sofa. "Grace deserves her happiness. We can make do." The wedding was planned for the first Sunday in April. It would be a small ceremony at the church, just close friends and some of the townspeople who had come to know Grace. Grace had no family to invite, and Samuel's only family was his brother back east, too far away to make the journey on short notice. Grace spent her evenings sewing a wedding dress from fabric Samuel insisted on buying her from the general store. It was simple but lovely, a cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Catherine helped when she had the strength, offering advice on the fit and styling. The days flew by in a flurry of preparations. Grace was both excited and nervous. She knew she loved Samuel, knew this was right, but she also worried. What if she was not a good ranch wife? What if she could not handle the isolation, the hard work? What if Samuel grew tired of her and Samuel seemed to sense her doubts? One evening, less than a week before the wedding, he took her hands in his. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "Not about marrying you," Grace assured him quickly. "I just worry that I might disappoint you. I have never lived on a ranch. I do not know anything about cattle or horses." "What if I am not what you need?" "You are exactly what I need," Samuel said firmly. "I am not marrying you because I need a ranch hand. I am marrying you because I love you, because you make me happier than I have ever been, because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Everything else we will figure out together." "I love you so much," Grace whispered. "Then that is all that matters." The night before the wedding, Grace barely slept. She lay in her small room at the Thorntons' house, holding Lily close, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She had arrived in Chico desperate and half-frozen, with no prospects and no hope. Now she was about to marry a wonderful man and start a new life filled with possibility. She thought about Thomas briefly, hoping he would approve. She believed he would. He had been a good man who had loved her, and if he could see her now, she thought he would be happy that she and his daughter were going to be cared for and loved. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Catherine, despite her weakness, insisted on helping Grace get ready. She braided Grace's long dark hair and wove in some early spring flowers that Dr. Thornton had picked that morning. The wedding dress fit perfectly, and Grace borrowed a lace shawl from Catherine to complete the outfit. "You look absolutely beautiful," Catherine said, tears in her eyes. "Samuel is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Grace replied. They walked to the church together, Dr. Thornton carrying Lily while Mary, James, and Emma danced around them excitedly. The church was small but welcoming, with more people gathered than Grace had expected. It seemed half the town had turned out to witness the wedding. Samuel waited at the front of the church with the minister. He wore a new suit, his hair freshly cut, and Grace thought he had never looked more handsome. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face lit up with pure joy. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. Samuel's voice was strong and sure, and Grace found her own voice steady despite her emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her sweetly, and the small congregation burst into applause. The townspeople had organized a small reception at the church hall. There was cake and punch, and someone had brought a fiddle to play music. Grace was overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had been strangers just a few months ago. They congratulated her and Samuel warmly, welcoming her into the community. Mr. Phillips from the general store gave them a set of fine china as a gift. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house brought a beautiful quilt. Even old Tom from the train station showed up with a carved wooden cradle for Lily. "I made this for my own daughter years ago," he said gruffly. "She is grown now with kids of her own. I would be honored if the little one used it." Grace hugged him, tears streaming down her face. Thank you all so much." As the sun began to set, Samuel loaded their belongings into the wagon. Grace said goodbye to the Thorntons, hugging each of them tightly. "I will visit soon," she promised Catherine. "You better," Catherine replied with a weak smile. "I want to hear all about married life." Then they were off, heading west toward the ranch as the sky turned pink and gold. Lily slept peacefully in Grace's arms, and Samuel drove with one hand, the other holding Grace's hand tightly. "Mrs. Brennan," Samuel said, trying out the name. "I like how that sounds." "So do I." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling completely content. They arrived at the ranch as darkness fell. Samuel had clearly prepared for their arrival. The house was spotlessly clean, with candles lit throughout and a fire burning cheerfully in the fireplace. He had even picked wildflowers and arranged them in a jar on the kitchen table. "Welcome home," Samuel said, lifting Grace and Lily down from the wagon. Then, to Grace's surprise, he scooped her up in his arms, careful not to jostle the baby. "Samuel," Grace laughed. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried them both inside, kicking the door closed behind him. Grace looked around the house with new eyes. This was her home now. Their home. Samuel set her gently on her feet. "I know it is not fancy, it is perfect," Grace interrupted. "Absolutely perfect." They put Lily to bed in the cradle Tom had given them, which Samuel had already set up in the spare bedroom. The baby settled quickly, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Then Samuel and Grace were alone, truly alone, as husband and wife for the first time. Grace felt suddenly shy, but Samuel took her hand and led her to the sofa in front of the fire. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "I just want to hold you, talk to you, be near you." "I want more than that," Grace said softly. She reached up and touched his face. "I want to be your wife in every way." Samuel kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Grace kissed him back with all the love and passion in her heart. They moved together naturally, their bodies fitting perfectly as they discovered each other. Later, lying in Samuel's bed with his arms around her, Grace felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Samuel replied, his voice drowsy and content. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." They fell asleep tangled together, the fire burning low, safe and warm and happy. The next months passed in a blur of joy and adjustment. Grace learned the rhythms of ranch life, discovering she enjoyed the work more than she had expected. She tended the vegetable garden Samuel helped her plant, learned to collect eggs from the chickens they bought, and even tried her hand at milking the cow Samuel acquired so Lily could have fresh milk. Samuel taught her to ride, starting her on the gentle lady. Grace was terrified at first, but gradually gained confidence. Soon she could ride well enough to accompany Samuel when he checked on the cattle grazing in the far pastures. Lily thrived in the ranch environment. She grew chubby and healthy, her cheeks rosy from the fresh air. She adored Samuel, reaching for him the moment he came into view and giggling at his antics. Samuel was utterly devoted to her, treating her exactly as if she were his own daughter. "I want to adopt her legally," Samuel told Grace one night as they lay in bed. "Give her my name. Make her officially my daughter, if that is all right with you." Grace felt tears of joy prick her eyes. Thomas would have been grateful to know his daughter had such a wonderful father to raise her. Yes, absolutely yes. They made arrangements with a lawyer in town, and by midsummer, Lily was legally Lily Brennan. Grace framed the adoption papers and hung them in Lily's room. The ranch prospered under Samuel's careful management and Grace's contributions. They expanded the garden, added more chickens, and Samuel bought a pair of pigs. Grace learned to make butter and cheese, discovering she had a talent for it. Samuel sold some of his trained horses for good prices and invested the money back into the ranch. In late summer, Grace realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Samuel. They were sitting on the front porch after supper, watching the sunset, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is a baby in there," she said simply. "Your baby." Samuel stared at her, his eyes wide. Then a huge smile spread across his face. "Truly, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I think so." Samuel let out a whoop of joy and pulled Grace into his arms, spinning her around. "We are having a baby. Grace, this is wonderful." "Careful," Grace laughed. "You will make me dizzy." Samuel immediately set her down gently. Sorry, I do not want to hurt you or the baby." "Should you be sitting? You need anything? Water? Food?" "I am fine," Grace assured him, touched by his concern. "Pregnancy is not an illness. Women work through it all the time. Still, you must take care of yourself, no heavy lifting, and if you feel tired, you must rest." "Yes, dear," Grace said with affectionate amusement. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace felt well, just a bit tired in the early months. Her belly grew slowly at first, then more rapidly. Samuel was constantly attentive, fussing over her in ways that were both sweet and exasperating. He insisted on doing all the heavy chores and would not let Grace climb ladders or do anything he deemed even remotely dangerous. Dr. Thornton confirmed the pregnancy and pronounced Grace healthy. Catherine, though still weak herself, was delighted by the news and knitted baby clothes with what strength she had. Grace visited Catherine regularly, bringing fresh eggs and vegetables from the ranch. She was saddened to see how much the older woman had declined. Catherine was bedridden now, barely able to stay awake for more than a few hours at a time. But she always rallied when Grace visited, wanting to hear about the ranch and Lily and the coming baby. "I am so happy for you," Catherine whispered during one visit in late October. "You deserve all this happiness, Grace. You and Samuel both." "You will get well," Grace said, though she knew it was not true. "Come spring, you will feel so much better," Catherine smiled sadly. "Perhaps, but if I do not, you must promise me something. Watch out for my children. Be there for them. They love you so much." "Of course I will," Grace promised, tears streaming down her face. "But you are going to be fine." Catherine died peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later. The whole town mourned her loss. Grace sobbed in Samuel's arms, grieving the friend who had been so kind to her. The funeral was well attended, and Grace made sure the children knew how much their mother had loved them. Dr. Thornton was devastated. Grace offered to return to help with the children, at least temporarily, but the doctor had made other arrangements. His sister was coming from Sacramento to take over the household. Grace visited often anyway, bringing Lily to play with Mary, James, and Emma. The children needed stability and familiar faces during this difficult time. Winter arrived, and Grace's pregnancy advanced. She was large now, moving more slowly but still active. Samuel had finished the addition to the house, expanding the spare bedroom and adding a small nursery adjacent to it. He built a crib and repainted the room in cheerful yellow. Grace sewed curtains and blankets, preparing for the baby's arrival. Lily was walking now, toddling around the house and getting into everything. She kept Grace constantly busy, but also provided endless entertainment. Samuel built her a small rocking horse, and Lily spent hours riding it, babbling happily to herself. On a cold night in early February, Grace's labor began. Samuel immediately rode to town to fetch Dr. Thornton, leaving Grace with instructions to stay calm and do nothing until he returned. Grace did her best, but the contractions were coming strong and close together. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, had agreed to come help with the birth. She arrived before Samuel and the doctor returned, took one look at Grace, and immediately began preparations. "This baby is coming fast," she announced. "First babies usually take their time, but second ones can be quick. How far apart are the pains?" 5 minutes, maybe less," Grace gasped. "Then we better get you into bed right now, Mrs. Henderson was a veteran of many births, and her calm competence was reassuring. When Samuel and Dr. Thornton finally arrived, Grace was already in active labor. Samuel looked terrified, but Mrs. Henderson shooed him out of the room. "Husbands just get in the way," she declared. "You go watch the little one and let us work." The labor was intense but relatively quick. Just before dawn, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Dr. Thornton placed the squalling infant in her arms, and Grace felt a rush of overwhelming love. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He certainly has a good set of lungs," Dr. Thornton said with a smile. "Let me get Samuel." Samuel burst into the room moments later, his face anxious. "Grace, are you all right?" "I am fine. Come meet your son." Samuel approached the bed slowly, as if in a dream. He looked down at the tiny red-faced baby in Grace's arms, and his eyes filled with tears. "Our son," he breathed. "Grace, he is beautiful." "What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names extensively, but had not settled on anything definite. Samuel reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately grasped his finger with surprising strength. "Thomas," Samuel said, "after your first husband, he gave you Lily, and I think he would be honored to have your son carry his name." Grace felt tears overflow. The generous gesture touched her deeply. "Thomas Samuel Brennan," she said. "That is perfect." Little Thomas, who they immediately started calling Tommy, thrived from the beginning. He was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Lily was fascinated by her baby brother, always wanting to touch him gently and bring him toys. The ranch grew busier with the addition of another child. Grace was constantly occupied with feeding, changing, and caring for 2 little ones. Samuel helped whenever he could, often carrying Tommy in a sling Grace made while he did chores around the property. The baby seemed to love the motion and the sound of his father's voice. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch. The garden flourished, the cattle had calves, and several of the mares foaled. It was a time of abundance and growth. Grace felt blessed beyond measure. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate. Now she had a loving husband, 2 healthy children, and a home she adored. One evening in May, after the children were asleep, Samuel and Grace sat on the front porch watching the stars appear. "Do you ever think about that night?" Samuel asked. "When you showed up at my door, half frozen with Lily in your arms. All the time, Grace admitted. I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If the station master had not told me about you, if I had tried to make it to town instead, if you had not been home that night. But I was home, Samuel said firmly. And you did come here. And everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to. I thought my life was over when Thomas died, Grace said quietly. I thought I had used up my chance at happiness. But then I found you, and you showed me that life gives second chances. You saved me, Samuel. You and your kindness and your love saved both of us. You saved me too, Samuel replied. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came along. This house was just a building before. Now it is a home because you are in it. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked as the night deepened around them. Grace felt a profound sense of peace. This was where she belonged. This was her family. This was her home. The years that followed were full and happy. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel gained a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the region, and buyers came from as far away as Sacramento to purchase his animals. Grace's butter and cheese became popular in town, and she sold her surplus at the general store for good prices. Tommy grew into a lively, adventurous boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He followed Samuel everywhere, learning about horses and cattle from the moment he could walk. Lily was a serious, thoughtful child who loved books and nature. She helped Grace in the garden and learned to ride almost as well as her father. When Tommy was 2, Grace became pregnant again. This baby was a girl, born in the autumn with red hair that neither Grace nor Samuel could explain until Samuel remembered his grandmother had been a redhead. They named her Rose Catherine, Rose for her coloring and Catherine in honor of Grace's friend who had passed. Rose was a cheerful, easy baby who smiled at everyone. She completed their family perfectly. Samuel built another addition onto the house, expanding it into a proper family home with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen. Grace decorated it with love, making curtains, braiding rugs, and creating a warm, welcoming space. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Birthdays and Christmases, first days of school and lost teeth, scraped knees and childhood illnesses. Grace and Samuel navigated it all together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. Dr. Thornton eventually remarried, a widow from Sacramento who was kind to his children. Grace remained close to Mary, James, and Emma, and their families visited back and forth regularly. Mr. Phillips retired and passed the general store to his son, but he remained a friend. Mrs. Henderson continued to run the boarding house well into her 70s. Chico grew and changed. New businesses opened, more families arrived, the railroad expanded. But the Brennan Ranch remained a constant, a place of stability and love on the edge of town. When Lily turned 16, Samuel legally changed her birth certificate to reflect her adoption, ensuring there would never be any question about her status as his daughter. Lily cried happy tears and hugged her father fiercely. "You have always been my real father," she told him. "Always." Tommy showed an aptitude for working with horses that rivaled his father's. By the time he was 14, he was training horses alongside Samuel, and buyers specifically requested animals they had worked with. Samuel was enormously proud of his son. Rose developed a love for growing things. She expanded the garden every year, experimenting with new vegetables and flowers. She talked about becoming a botanist, a dream that both Grace and Samuel encouraged. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel gave Grace a beautiful piano he had ordered specially from San Francisco. He had it shipped to Chico by train and then hauled it out to the ranch with the help of several neighbors. Grace cried when she saw it, remembering the conversation they had on their first outing together when she had mentioned wanting to learn to play. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything about that day," Samuel replied. "And every day since. You said simple things, remember? A home, a garden, maybe learning to play piano. I want to give you all your dreams, Grace." Grace threw her arms around her husband. "You already have. You gave me everything that matters." They held a party to celebrate their anniversary, inviting friends from town and neighboring ranches. The house was full of laughter and music, children running everywhere while adults talked and ate Grace's cooking. As Grace looked around at the scene, at her husband standing with Tommy discussing horses, at Lily helping serve food, at Rose showing the younger children her latest flowers, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark days in Boston. This was the happiness she had hoped for when she boarded that train heading west. She had found it all, and more than she had ever imagined, because a kind man had opened his door on a freezing night and said, "Let me warm you both." More years passed. The children grew into young adults. Lily met a schoolteacher who had come to Chico from Oregon, and they courted respectfully for 2 years before marrying. The wedding was held at the ranch, under the oak trees Samuel and Grace had planted when they first married. Lily made a beautiful bride, and Samuel cried as he walked her down the makeshift aisle. Tommy married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a practical young woman who loved ranch life as much as he did. They built a house on the far edge of the Brennan property, and Tommy continued to work the ranch with Samuel. Eventually, they expanded operations, buying more land and increasing the herds. Rose went to college in San Francisco to study botany, one of the first young women from Chico to pursue higher education. Grace and Samuel were enormously proud, though they missed her terribly. She returned every summer and eventually took a position at the Agricultural College in Davis, close enough to visit regularly. As Samuel and Grace entered their 40s, and then their 50s, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Tommy. Samuel still worked every day, unable to imagine life without the ranch, but he moved more slowly and took more breaks. Grace's hair began to gray, and laugh lines deepened around her eyes. They became grandparents, first to Lily's 3 children, then to Tommy's 4. Rose never married but lived a full life devoted to her research and teaching. The ranch house that had once held just Samuel now echoed with the sounds of grandchildren every Sunday, when the whole extended family gathered for dinner. On a spring evening in 1914, 30 years after that frozen night when Grace had first knocked on Samuel's door, they sat together on the front porch. They were both in their 50s now, their faces lined with age but their love as strong as ever. "You have any regrets?" Samuel asked, taking Grace's hand in his. Grace thought about it seriously before answering. "I regret that Thomas died so young and never got to know Lily, but I cannot regret the path that brought me here to you. Every hardship, every struggle led me to this life, and I would not trade it for anything." "I keep thinking about how easily we might have missed each other," Samuel said. "If Harold Gunderson had actually shown up, you would have married him and gone to his homestead. We never would have met." "But he did not show up," Grace pointed out. "And I did come to your door and you let us in. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was God's plan. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." Samuel lifted her hand and kissed it gently. "I told you once that I would take care of you both, remember? I promised to warm you to keep you safe." "You have done so much more than that," Grace said softly. "You gave us a home, a family, a beautiful life. You loved Lily as your own from the very beginning. You have been the most wonderful husband and father I could have imagined. It was easy, Samuel replied, "because I loved you from almost the first moment. When I opened that door and saw you standing there with Lily in your arms, so brave and determined despite being frozen and terrified, something in me just knew. This is the woman I have been waiting for." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the land they loved, the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their love in every tree they had planted, every fence post Samuel had set, every flower Grace had grown. The next morning was a Sunday, and the house gradually filled with family. Lily arrived with her husband and teenage children. Tommy and his wife walked over from their house, their younger children running ahead. Rose came in from Davis, bringing a new variety of rose bush she had cultivated and wanted to plant in her mother's garden. They gathered around the large dining table Samuel had built years ago to accommodate their growing family. Grace looked around at the faces she loved most in the world. Her children, all grown and successful. Her grandchildren, healthy and happy. Her husband, still handsome to her eyes despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face. Tommy stood to make a toast. To Mom and Dad, who built this ranch with hard work and love, and who taught us what family really means. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from the example you set. Thank you for giving us this legacy. Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming happiness. After dinner, the grandchildren begged Samuel to tell them stories, as he always did. They gathered around him in the living room while the adults cleaned up in the kitchen. Grace could hear his deep voice spinning tales of the old days, of horses and cattle drives, of the early days of Chico when it was barely more than a settlement. "Tell us again how you met Grandma," one of the younger children demanded, and Grace smiled. This was their favorite story. She listened from the kitchen as Samuel recounted that frozen night, how Grace had appeared at his door like a vision, how brave she had been. He never mentioned how desperate she had been, never spoke of the fear or the poverty that had driven her west. He always framed it as an adventure, a romantic tale of fate bringing them together. "And I opened the door," Samuel said, his voice warm with memory, "and I saw this beautiful woman holding a baby, both of them half frozen. And I knew right then that my life was about to change. I said, 'Let me warm you both,' and I brought them inside, and they never left. 'Because you fell in love,' one of the children crowed. "That is exactly right," Samuel confirmed. "I fell so in love that I could not imagine my life without them. So I married your grandmother, and we have been together ever since." "That is so romantic," Lily's oldest daughter sighed. She was 14 and at the age where romance was endlessly fascinating. "It was romantic," Samuel agreed. "It still is. Every day with your grandmother is a gift." Grace wiped her eyes, laughing at herself for being so emotional. Lily came up beside her and put an arm around her shoulders. "You two are everyone's relationship goals," she said with a smile. "We have just been very lucky," Grace replied. "It is more than luck," Lily said seriously. "You chose each other every day, through good times and hard times. That is not luck. That is love and commitment." As evening fell and families began to gather their things to head home, Grace walked each group out to their wagons and cars. The world had changed so much. Automobiles were becoming common. Electricity was reaching even rural areas, and talk of war in Europe dominated the newspapers. But here on the ranch, some things remained constant. Love, family, the land. Samuel came up behind Grace as they waved goodbye to the last of their visitors. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him, feeling safe and cherished. "Another good day," Samuel murmured into her hair. "The best," Grace agreed. They stood there as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, that had looked down on their wedding night, that had shone over this ranch for 3 decades of their marriage. "I love you, Grace Brennan," Samuel said, "just as much today as the day I married you. More even because I know you better, love you deeper." "I love you too," Grace replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you for warming us that night. Thank you for taking us in and making us part of your life." "Thank you for showing up at my door," Samuel countered. "Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for 30 years of happiness." They kissed under the stars, a long, sweet kiss that held all the love and promise of their years together. When they finally pulled apart, they walked hand in hand back into their home, their sanctuary, the place where they had built their life together. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Grace banked the fire while Samuel locked up. They moved through their evening routine with the ease of long practice, comfortable in their partnership. In their bedroom, the same room where they had spent their wedding night, they prepared for bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Grace thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of losing Thomas, the struggle to survive in Boston, the desperate gamble of heading west to marry a stranger. The terror of that frozen night, not knowing if she and Lily would survive. And then the miracle of Samuel, opening his door and his heart, offering warmth and kindness and eventually love. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked sleepily. "Everything," Grace replied. "How grateful I am, how blessed we have been." "We have been blessed," Samuel agreed. "But we also worked hard, chose love, built something real. That counts for something too." "It counts for everything," Grace said. They fell asleep as they always did, wrapped in each other's arms, safe and warm and loved. Outside, the night wind whispered through the oak trees. Inside, all was peaceful. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. The war in Europe touched even Chico, with young men enlisting and families anxiously following the news. The ranch weathered economic ups and downs, droughts and good years. Samuel and Grace aged, but their love never faltered. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered again for a massive celebration. There were grandchildren in their 20s now, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house could not hold everyone, so they set up tables outside under the oak trees, stringing lanterns for when evening fell. Grace and Samuel stood together, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy they had built. Looking at all the faces, seeing the love and success and happiness, Grace marveled at how one decision, one moment of desperate hope had led to all of this. As the sun set on their celebration, Tommy stood once more to make a toast. 40 years ago, Dad met Mom on the worst night of her life. She showed up at his door, freezing and alone with a baby in her arms, and Dad, being the man he is, said, "Let me warm you both." He took them in, and in doing so, he started all of this. Tommy gestured around at the assembled family. "Every person here exists because Dad chose kindness that night. Because he saw someone in need and helped without hesitation. Because he fell in love with a brave woman and her baby girl and he built a life with them." Tommy's voice grew thick with emotion. "Dad, Mom, you have shown us what love looks like, what commitment means, what family is really about. Everything good in my life comes from the example you set. Thank you for 40 years of showing us how it is done." The toast was met with cheers and applause. Grace looked up at Samuel, tears streaming down her face, and found him looking back at her with the same love she had seen in his eyes on their wedding day. 40 more years?" he asked with a gentle smile. "At least," Grace replied. "They did not get 40 more years. Time eventually catches up with everyone. But they got 15 more good years together. Years filled with more grandchildren and great-grandchildren, more sunsets on the porch, more quiet mornings drinking coffee together, more laughter and love and simple daily joy. When Samuel died peacefully in his sleep at 73, Grace was holding his hand. It was a cold January night, ironically enough, 45 years almost to the day from when they had first met. Grace sat with him until morning, remembering every moment they had shared, every laugh and tear, every mundane day and special occasion. The funeral was massive, with people coming from all over California to pay respects to a man who had touched so many lives. But for Grace, the most important people were there in the front rows. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the legacy of love she and Samuel had created together. Grace lived for another 8 years, long enough to see Rose receive a prestigious award for her botanical research, long enough to see Tommy's oldest grandson take over much of the ranch operations, long enough to dance at more weddings and hold more babies. She lived in the house Samuel had built, surrounded by the evidence of their love. On a spring morning, Grace woke to see Samuel standing at the foot of her bed. He looked young again, the way he had that first day when he opened his door to her. He was smiling, his hand extended, ready to go. He asked, "Where are we going?" Grace asked, though somehow she already knew. "Home," Samuel said simply. "I have been keeping it warm for you." Grace took his hand, feeling young and whole again herself. She looked back once at the house, the ranch, the land they had loved. Then she looked at Samuel and smiled. "Let's go home," she said. They walked together into the light, hand in hand as they had walked through life. Together at the start, together at the end, and together for every precious moment in between. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations. Tommy's children and grandchildren worked the land Samuel had loved. Rose's botanical garden became famous throughout California. Lily's descendants became teachers and nurses and community leaders. And all of them carried forward the legacy of love and kindness that had begun on a frozen night when a desperate young woman knocked on a door, and a good man said, "Let me warm you both." Years later, one of Grace's great-great-grandchildren found an old journal Grace had kept. In it, she had written on that first anniversary with Samuel, "I came west seeking security for my daughter. I found so much more. I found love, partnership, joy, purpose, and a family beyond my wildest dreams. I came to Samuel's door broken and afraid. He opened that door and gave me not just warmth on a cold night, but warmth for the rest of my life. Some people get one great love. I was blessed enough to have two. Thomas gave me Lily and taught me what love could be. Samuel gave me everything else and taught me that love has no limits, that families are built from choice as much as blood, that home is not a place but the people you love. If I could go back to that train platform, terrified and alone, I would tell myself, hold on, help is coming. Love is waiting just down that frozen road, and it will all be worth it." And it was. Every struggle, every fear, every frozen step down that dark road led to a lifetime of warmth, love, and happiness. Grace and Samuel's story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The message was always the same. Be kind, choose love, open your door to those in need. You never know what blessings might walk into your life. The ranch still stands today, a testament to the love story that began over a century ago. And on cold January nights when the wind howls and the snow falls, some say you can still see them. A young couple standing on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe and completely, perfectly in love.